going on YouTube? It's your boy. I got the wrong hat. There we go. What's going on YouTube? It's your boy Wales, New Jersey. UFC 302 live this weekend from Newark, New Jersey. Let's take a look at some of the fights on this card. So we kick off the early prelims, 6:30 East Coast time on Saturday. First fight, making his UFC debut, Mitch Raposo versus Andre Lima. Andre Lima in his last fight for Igor Severino and won by disqualification. Severino went full Luis Suarez on him in the second round, bit him. Wasn't disqualification. I got Lima in this one. Next up in the women's bantamweight division, Alien Perez versus Jocelyn Edwards. Alien Perez 2-1 in the UFC, Jocelyn Edwards 4-3. All wins have come by decision by both these ladies, so more than likely we'll go to a decision. I'm going to take Jocelyn Edwards now. Next up, welterweight division, Mickey Gall versus Basil Havez. Mickey Gall, the Jersey native, with a 3-inch height advantage and a 2-inch reach advantage. Mickey Gall really hasn't fought that tough a competition in the UFC, to be honest. He's 6-5, coming off losses to Mike Malott and Alex Morono. His wins come against Jordan Williams, Samuel Turini, George Sullivan, Sage Northcutt, CM Punk, Mike Jackson. He has lost to Randy Brown, Diego Sanchez, Mike Perry, and his last two losses, Alex Morono and Mike Malott. So I wouldn't say that tough a competition he's been facing in the UFC. He's coming up against Basil Havez, who has had one fight in the UFC, which he's lost, but it was against Jack Della Maddalena. Jack Della Maddalena ain't no joke, and Havez took him to a decision, a split decision at that, so it was a close fight. That's a tough fight, man. Jack Della Maddalena is on a tear in the UFC. 7-0, coming off wins over Gilbert Burns and Kevin Holland. It's a interesting fight, man. I think I gotta give this to Havez, and that will be the early prelims at 6:30 p.m. on the East Coast. All right, so kicking off the prelims, Nico Price versus Alex Morono. Nico Price is the underdog in this one against the -238 Alex Morono favorite. Alex Morono is 13-6 in the UFC, coming off a win against Court McGee, a loss to Joaquin Buckley, a win against Tim Means, and a loss to Santiago Ponzinibbio. Been in the UFC for a while, since 2016, racked up 13 wins, most of them coming by decision, but going up against Nico Price, who is 7-7 in the UFC. His last defeat was against Robbie Lawler, 39 seconds in round number 1, knockout. Also, he lost to Phil Rowe, Michel Pereira, and Vicente Luque. That's right there, tough competition. Wins against Alex Oliveira and James Vick. This should be an interesting fight here. Nico Price, Alex Morono, should be a close fight. I'm picking Morono. Next up, Phil Rowe versus Jake Matthews. Jake Matthews, the well-rounded Aussie, against Phil Rowe. Phil Rowe is 10-4 in his mixed martial arts career. He is 3-2 in the UFC. His last defeat was against Neil Magny back in last year. He has taken a significant amount of grappling matches though in between. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 grappling matches. That's more than his UFC fights. He did win against Nico Price, Jason Witt, and Orion Cosces. But with the experience level there, I'm going to pick Jake Matthews. After that, Grant Dawson versus Joe Solecki. Joe Solecki, a New Jersey native, versus Grant Dawson, who coming off a loss to Bobby Green. Surprising loss in that last match for Grant Dawson. He is 8-1 in the UFC. Bobby Green knocked him out in 33 seconds of round number 1. I don't think anybody saw that coming. He was on a tear before, beating Jared Gordon, Madsen, Amir Ismagulov. He was on a good tear before that Bobby Green loss. Joe Solecki, born in Jersey, now fighting out of North Carolina, 5-2 in the UFC. Last fight was a loss against Drakkar Klose, lost in round 1 by a slam. Wins against Carl Deaton III, Alex De Silva, Donald Cerrone in a grappling competition, Jim Miller, Austin Hubbard, Matt Weinman. I'm picking Grant Dawson in this one. He's a massive favorite. They are both grapplers. The grappling advantage, though, I think does go to Grant Dawson. I got Dawson in this one. Up after that, Cesar Almeida versus Roman Kopylov. Brazil versus Russia. The 5-0 Brazilian versus the 12-3 Russian. Kopylov is 4-3 in the UFC. His last flat out against Anthony Hernandez, he lost in the round 2 by rear naked choke. Wins over Josh Fremd, Claudio Ribeiro, Punahele Soriano, and Alessio Di Cirio. All those wins come by stoppage, by the way, too. Combination punches, hit, liver punch. A Russian who knows how to strike and not grapple. Most Russians are known for grappling, but he's taken on Cesar Almeida, who is 1-0 in the UFC with win over Dillian Budka. But he is a former kickboxer, and he has 3 fights against Alex Pereira, and he beat him in one of those fights. Lost 2 of them, but he beat him in one of those fights. So you know there's some serious striking ability. This should be a very good fight. Very close odds here. I'm going to have to edge it to Kopylov, but we'll see. And that's the prelims. 8 p.m. on the East Coast on ESPN2 and ESPN+. Kicking off the main card, Randy Brown versus Zaleski dos Santos. Randy Brown has been on a streak recently. He is 12-5 in the UFC. Been in the UFC for a while. Last win against Muslim Sakirov, Wellington Thurman. Did lose to Jack Della Maddalena, but everybody has. Wins against Francisco Trinaldo, Chaos Williams, Jared Gooden, and Alex Oliveira. But he's going up against Zaleski dos Santos. This dude is 10-3 in the UFC. He's got 1 year advantage in the UFC over Randy Brown. Last fight against Abu Magomedov. Hey, when you get a win against Nurmagomedov, it's always a big win. He also beat Benoit Saint Denis. Lost to Muslim Sakirov and Jingliang Li, but he did have a win against Sean Strickland with a spinning back kick and punches in round 1. So interesting fight to look at here. I'm going to go with Randy Brown though, with the experience. Next up, Jalton Almeida versus Alexander Romanov. Almeida coming off a loss to Curtis Blades. Romanov coming off a win against Ivanov. I think this is a bounce back fight for Almeida. I think he takes it. Almeida for the win. Up after that, Kevin Holland versus Michal Osheshuk. Polish versus the American. Kevin Holland will fight anybody, any day, anytime. He don't give a fuck. 12-8 in the UFC, coming off a loss to Michael Venom Page at UFC 299. Also a loss against Jack Della Maddalena, Stephen Thompson, Hamzat Chimaev. Has wins against Michael Chiesa and Santiago Ponzinibbio. Kevin Holland don't give a damn, man. He's gonna fight anybody any day. But he's fighting the Polishman, Michal Osheshuk. He's 7-5 in the UFC, coming off a loss to Michel Pereira, win over Chidi Njokuani, a loss to Kai Borrallo, and a win against Cody Brundage. I think this is a bounce back fight for Kevin Holland. I think this is they're both strikers. I think Kevin Holland takes this. The co-main event of the evening, number 1 ranked Sean Strickland versus number 7 ranked Paulo Costa in the middleweight division. Even on the numbers here on the tail of the tape, Sean does have a 4-inch reach advantage. Strickland coming off a loss to Dracus du Plessis in his last fight, lost his belt. He is 15-6 in the UFC. Did win the UFC middleweight championship against Izzy, but he is fighting Paulo Costa, who is 6-3 in the UFC, coming off a loss to Robert Whittaker. His wins over Luke Rockhold, Yoel Romero, Uriah Hall, and Johnny Hendricks. Did lose to Izzy, did lose to Marvin Vittori. I think this should be Sean Strickland fight. Sean Strickland, and by the way, this is a 5-round fight. So I think Sean Strickland, the cardio might pay off here for Sean Strickland. If he can drag Costa into the championship rounds, I think it's all Strickland in this one. And that leads us to the main event of the evening. Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. the #1 ranked pound-for-pound fighter in the organization versus the #4 ranked veteran of the game, Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier started fighting in the UFC back in 2011. He is 22-7, coming off a big win against Benoit Saint Denis, the right hook in the second round. Did lose to Justin Gaethje, beat Michael Chandler, lost to Charles Oliveira, beat Conor McGregor twice, Dan Hooker, lost to Khabib, beat Max Holloway, Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gaethje, Anthony Pettis, Jim Miller, did lose to Michael Johnson, Bobby Green, Joe Duffy, the list goes on. Dustin is an absolute veteran of the game, and he has some clean, crisp striking. And he said he wants to go out there and knock him out. Now, Islam Makhachev, the #1 ranked pound-for-pound fighter in the division, in the whole organization, 14-1, coming off a big win against Alexander Volkanovski with the head kick in round 1. Before that, he beat Volkanovski again. He beat Charles Oliveira, Bobby Green, Dan Hooker, Thiago Moises, Drew Dober, Davey Ramos, Arman Sarukian, Kajan Johnson, Gleison Tebow, the list goes on. But he did lose to Adriano Martinez in round 1 by a punch. Now, what is Adrian Martinez? He's a southpaw. What is Dustin Poirier? A southpaw. So this fight could go either way. I'm thinking Islam Makhachev, if he gets a hold of Dustin, takes him down, I think it's over for Dustin. If Dustin catches Islam on his feet, if he touches his chin, I think it could be over for Islam. Dustin has been talking about having one foot out the door in retirement. So he could, if he loses, he could retire. If he wins, he could retire. Is that a little bit of extra motivation to go out there and get that win and get the belt and go out on top? Meanwhile, Islam has Khabib back in his corner. And having Khabib in your corner, that's a big advantage, big motivation for Islam. They never want to upset Khabib. So this fight honestly could go either way. I just think it's going to be all Islam minus 675. Dustin is a plus 490. It should be a good fight. If Islam gets him down though, I think it's over. I think Dustin needs to go out there and blitz him. Try and touch his chin, man. Because if it gets to the ground, I think it could be over real quick. So I'm picking Islam. And there it is. UFC 302 live from the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey, June 1st. Let me know who you think is going to win in the comment section. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And until Saturday night, salute.